here. It is January 16th in the year 2018. A lot of people don't want to know what's going on in this world because in their minds, they don't want to be focused on the negative. And from my position, as long as I've been involved in the alternative media, at least 13 years, it's never been about living in fear. It's been about empowerment, taking our lives back, taking our minds back, taking our spirits back. And unless we're aware that there's a problem, kind of like, with a tooth issue or a physical issue, or putting our hand down on a hot stove, right? Unless we have that type of nervous system type of response, how would we know that something is wrong? There's a purpose to awareness. So I do believe in the power of positivity and having a mindset destined for success despite the things that are taking place in this world. I think context is really, really critical. So I have a few notes down and I'm going to share some of these thoughts with you. We can go on for hours, but I just want to plant some seeds as we go into the new year in the aftermath of the false alarm in Hawaii. And many people don't believe that it's a false alarm. They're asking themselves, why would it be a false alarm? Why would millions of people get a text message, a take cover, alleged reports of a missile heading for Hawaii, if it was someone accidentally leaning on a red button or some sort of other alert button? It just doesn't make sense. And so there's concern with this. I'm just going to start here and be brief. The PSYOPs, right, is inundating people with World War III fear-mongering. It doesn't mean that there aren't challenges ahead. It's that the name of the game is to get people to shut down consciously. And so if there's false alarm, false alarm, false alarm, and years of coverage of North Korea might do this, Trump might do this, a lot of people will just tune out and say it's never going to happen. What if that's the plan? Despite the fear that comes up regarding certain events, I believe that we are alive for a reason here on the earth. I don't believe that it's an accident. I don't really believe that we're victims. I believe that there are reasons why some things happen to us. I don't necessarily think it's our karma necessarily. It could. But we could also be tested. Because I think that this domain, this planet, is a place where souls go to evolve. And that is my spiritual message. So I just want to bring up a couple positive things for you to keep in your mindset. Social media, as we know it, has been around for over a decade. And I said in my first commentary on Facebook is the place where we need to be establishing the real meetup, not letting that replace the revolution. Of course, I don't really use words like revolution anymore. Never really did. It's beyond that, and we're talking about evolving the consciousness. But the point is that the addictive nature, so I spoke about this first off the grid in 2012 when I was staying in the yurt in another part of Colorado. And it hit me then. Here I am, years after opening up a Facebook account and 6 years after starting my Access TV show, which has now evolved to full-time YouTube. And although positive things, and I do want to note that, and miracles, and even God speaking to us through people on Facebook, in many ways, it replaces the real meetup and the real friendships. And we need to take our power back from the algorithms. We need to take our minds back. We need to not let ourselves be so automated. If there's certain things that I want to look up on the internet, I have the ability to look up those things on the internet and they're not censored. They may not be promoted in the suggested videos. They may not be monetized, but that information is there. And sometimes people voluntarily take down their own information. And some people just give up because, they're upset at what YouTube's doing or Google's doing, and they forget their other websites where they can put their stuff up. There's a lot of stuff that's been allowed to be on the internet in a day and age and a generation where people have been screaming about censorship. Sometimes I wonder if these people even know what censorship actually looks like. But yes, we are entering the arena of digital censorship to the point where certain things are not suggested or coming up in the search engine. But that's not the end of the world. We've had a long time See, a lot of people don't like people that warn them. The benefit of being warned is that you have advanced time. So let's say you're being warned about channels going dark. Back up your channel. Appreciate the warning and the ability to get prepared ahead of time. So the internet is still an advantage to us, and I still think there is untapped potential. Email. Think about the day where we had to wait. Maybe this is before our generation, where people had to wait months to hear from someone. And so, there was a big anticipation for that letter from the man that delivers the mail. But in doing so, there was also so much more effort put into writing that letter. Now when I look at my email, 1 out of 100, 1 out of 300 will be a regular email. It's just been inundated with the bots. With like newsletter, sign up. It's like I made a mistake years ago, maybe putting my email down in the wrong, and now it's just flooded. It's good for us to have the instantaneous communication in the YouTube comment section as well. Some people take that for granted too. So sometimes people don't know what we have until it's gone. We should work to be warm with each other, inform each other of things, and work to help each other out with the sharing of information that this technology allows. So I'm an advocate more now than ever in properly, mindfully using this technology, not letting the technology use us. And I use the analogy of the buffet. Let's say there's a bunch of McDonald's items over here, and even if you eat meat, let's say there's raw, organic, grass-fed meat over there. Which are you going to choose? Content on the internet, it's a lot like that. There's more information about different spiritual ideas and people around the world. I don't really like boxes like races and cultures. But within the English-speaking world, YouTube, we are exposed to all different types of people from our own culture because we are kind of locked into the Western world. But that still gives us an insight into ideas, opinions, perspectives not heard on the mainstream media. The whole idea, even before YouTube, the idea of alternative communications was really attractive to me as a kid. My hobby as a 14-year-old was messing around on the CB radio. As a 11-year-old, I remember one time my mother grounded me and said, no TV. So when I went to visit my dad up in Portland from Aurora, what did I do for a day but play DJ and learn how to do the dubbing? We were going from one cassette tape to another cassette tape, and he had one of those big old tower type. But even as a child, I was fascinated with the idea, although I didn't call it alternative media, and that is in of itself a box. Last year I coined the term free media to distance myself from some of the nonsense going on in the alternative media. We'll get to that in a little bit. But you have access to things that in many of our cultures around the world and societies, information was banned and forbidden. And people that were caught with certain alternative thoughts, learn about the Gnostics if you haven't already. This would be the fall or the period after Jesus Christ and right before the fall of the Roman Empire. And in a future video, maybe I'll go back and talk about the history of that and the Cathars. But it's a very interesting history, the persecution in Europe towards those that weren't following the church, so to speak. So we have information today that we did not in the past. We have affordable means of creating films and documentaries. What I'm doing right now is on a shoestring budget. From the lights to the camera to the tripod to the microphone, the whole 9 yards, to living off the grid instead of renting a studio somewhere or renting a room somewhere and working a job full time. I've adjusted my life because the technology has caught up. Would this have been possible on my budget 10 years ago or 5 years ago? I'm not so sure. Maybe 5 years ago. 10? Maybe not. 15? A little bit harder. Satellite technology wasn't $66 a month as it is now. Probably would have been 100, 200 plus. And do we have to pay anything to upload to YouTube? Do you have to pay anything to watch it? So these are things that we need to keep in our consciousness. And I'll speak more to this in the future. Picture, and I'm not necessarily saying that I'm going to be the person to do it. You could be the person to do it or a friend of yours. Picture a group of people coming together and creating alternative media content off the grid using solar power, generators if need be. But the idea is saving money on the overhead and creating a lot of content. When you have more than one person working on a project, say you have several people, you can kick out a documentary in a week instead of one person struggling, and I am cultivating, and I'll be able to write more about this as I'm older. Creating alternative media while off the grid. It's still in development. And so these are things to keep in mind. Okay, continuing. With the internet, there's more information about off-grid living than ever before, from a do-it-yourself video to getting information about counties where you may want to go to and may not want to go to. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, it was a lot harder to get information. There may not even have been any YouTubes about particular counties or issues going on in particular counties. Also, people are learning how other people live off the grid that goes beyond the stereotype of the militia person or the person running from the law. There's a documentary from the Denver Post that was well done, featuring a family living in Hooper, Colorado. Really a spotlight on the people, the people behind the stories. And so somebody needs to do the research on the internet if they're planning to go off the grid. It's not like the old days. Some people are used to the freedoms that we've had. We've seen major changes in our country in the last couple of decades, in the last couple of years. And I'm concerned where things will be going in the future. Some people cite Agenda 21. Sometimes it's not a Agenda 21 issue. Sometimes it's an issue of a county cracking down because they don't want a bunch of people moving there because they can see the writing on the wall with the economy and the potential for war. And they're not in a mindset of welcoming domestic American refugees to their communities. They're freaked out about their water. And I'm not saying that's right, but I also understand what that's like. I was a Portlander once, and I would probably still be a Portlander if I could still rent a room for $400 or less. That has changed. Okay, the cost of housing has changed with a lot of people, and I'm not blaming. I'm not angry anymore because I don't live there anymore, but I was at the time, so I know what it's like. And I also know what it's like to be on the other side of the fence, to be going to a county that doesn't want a bunch of new people moving there and bad blood over that issue. So it's good to do your homework on the internet with regards to your goals. Don't spend all this time on a lot of this fake conspiracy news that's out there. There are conspiracies that are real. There are certain things that we're facing. There's also a lot of people out there that are spinning us in different directions. Now, demonstrated versions of local currencies do exist, and we saw a lot of this after 2008, 2009. It was the point where people in local areas, there were articles saying all these different states have established their local currencies, but did it really take off to being somewhat of a movement? With all that banker bailout money and more debt, no. If we were forced to, through an economic collapse, I think some communities will survive. They'll be able to figure things out without a Federal Reserve fiat bank. Is Bitcoin the solution? I don't think so. 77% of the mining pool machines are located in China. So if there was going to be some major economic warfare with regards to that, it could happen through Bitcoin. So with regards to deceivers in the alternative media, we have had enough time to see people show their true colors. But it's a waste of time to sit there making videos, so-and-so exposed, and constantly focusing on these other individuals. I don't even watch content from InfoWars even to criticize or get angry, because I know there's an emotional negative reaction that appears within me, especially when I see the Alex Jones of today. I even steer away from the more charismatic stuff that I was a fan of 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I got involved in this stuff. 9/11 Road to Tyranny came out in 2002. That's when I started looking in his direction. So I've seen people like him and others change. And I'll tell you what, this may be unpopular. I think some of these folks are deliberately being self-destructive. They have orders from their handlers. They're influencers of many men. That's why they're in their position. That's why the algorithms work for them so well. So even if they're not making the AdSense, they got the eyeballs on them, and someone's invested in the eyeballs being on that disinformation agent. So instead of just focus on the disinformation agents, what is our truth? What do we stand for? And like I said, in past videos, I'll mention it again, when I got involved in this stuff after 9/11, it was like looking at the Eye of Sauron, a reference to Lord of the Rings. Mordor, the battle of good and evil, the all-seeing eye. And so there was a mass movement of consciousness, if you will, of people that were waking up to the idea that Reality is not as it seems. The purpose of that initial awareness is not to learn to become a victim or learn to live in fear. The purpose of that initial awakening is to learn to become empowered. If the other questions start coming in, well, who am I? What am I capable of? If something's trying to oppress me, why are they trying to oppress us? What is happening here in this world between these apparent forces of darkness, and I would say beyond human, and a lot of people suspect that, and I would say the forces of nature and things that are natural, creatures, animals, humans, life forms and spirits that are natural to that of the earth. So we're going beyond human here. Okay. Many men and women have been going their own way. Is that really the worst thing? Do we really need to be stuck in this codependent late 70s love song? And then having resentments. She's just a devil woman with evil on her mind. It's like, look, and I've talked about this for years, and I get into it in earlier videos, not so much today because I've moved away from the urban environments where, you know, there's a lot of modern people playing their modern games. So I uprooted myself from an environment that made me unhappy. So it doesn't need to play a critical role in this show. But there is a long history of men and women that have gone their own way, that are on the spiritual path, especially if, at least in their mind, and it is in my mind, they're looking at things that are of a controversial nature that can turn some people off. But when you're really on the path of truth, not ego and fame and fortune, but on the path of truth and serving the true creator of all that is, it's not about impressing human beings. Men, women, it's about being all that you can be. And to do that, you got to go beyond your own lust. You know, our bodies have these built-in attractions and repulsions that are based on biology that may have nothing to do with our spirit at all. So a lot of people, some of them, I think their sexuality is on autopilot. That's not a concept. Biological autopilot. There's other elements of the biological autopilot, not to be confused with racism, but there are also behavioral dispositions. Humans have particular behavioral dispositions, okay? But someone could rise above certain behavioral dispositions and be the person that they're destined to be. That doesn't mean that you need to follow in my footsteps. If you're in a happy relationship, that's great. But this is a point that needs to be made about the self-pity. And we're taught sometimes in this world to have pity for ourselves, right? If we're not being like glorified or gratified or receiving the approval of others. Some people really have a trophy husband or a trophy girlfriend or a trophy wife, and that concept of that is alien to me. But that's definitely anyone who's into that. Hey, look at what I've got. That's hierarchy. That's reptilian mind. That's not the higher self. So there are humans amongst us at different levels of consciousness. You have a choice what level of consciousness that you're going to be in. So we're going to start going more into the spiritual side of things. We got to think about, you know, movement, action, living, breathing. It could be a warlike or it can be peaceful. We could be mindful or it could be unmindful. The martial arts is displayed as today a competition between two men, and which man's going to end up on top and which man's going to end up unconscious. But if you look at martial arts, for example, martial arts body movements, Tai Chi, certain Kung Fu systems like Tiger and Crane. And when you see the mimicking of animal movements in the traditional martial arts, such as Kung Fu, and there's much to appreciate from the other movements, also known as a kata, the form. I call it the warrior's dance. And so when you're moving and you're in your element, right, there's something about that that brings in the energy centers. There's a sense of self-mastery. There's a sense of respect that comes about through the practice. And I haven't, at least not in this life, had the ability to train, you know, with any professional school for a prolonged period of time. But I've always been fascinated since I was a kid about the monks that trained in temples and how it was done for a different purpose, and how there were spiritual views that were also adopted within their society and culture, like Buddhism, like Taoism, like Confucianism, and then there's Shinto in Japan. I've always felt an affinity for ancient Japan and China, both. More so those countries than Korea. And I don't fully know why. I know that one of my best friends in this lifetime was a Japanese martial artist who taught me some interesting things. But as an adult, I learned how to teach myself, had to, sink or swim. I had to teach myself the rest. And I've come to learn that it's not so much about combat, martial arts, and who's on top. And that type of mindset that people can get obsessed with can eat someone alive. And so some of the people that get involved in the martial arts that in that mindset lead unhappy lives and get into unfortunate circumstances. In some cases, they do deliberately when they're going to go do a press conference about a fight, and whether it be the boxers or the MMA. But I just want people to understand, because there's a negative connotation, just like there might be a negative connotation about certain peoples or certain music. Turn off that. That's devil music. There could be certain knee-jerk reactions in the culture. But if you look at before what our culture has morphed the martial arts into appearing to be, and you go more into the pages of time, it's much more beautiful. The lives of the samurai, obviously very bloody, a very bloody code, a caste system, but within the philosophy of Bushido, there are things there that relate to serving a greater cause, and other things that I would say relate to personal discipline, or disciplining the mind, or focus. That's why there's certain Zen in the art of, and the businessman's mindset, the samurai philosophy, and things of that nature. We can apply certain disciplines of human consciousness to our own lives. So someone could be a martial artist, and it could be more like a dance to them, or a way they connect with their spirit, or something that Bruce Lee also talked about, even though he displayed quite a ferocious dragon spirit of sorts. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind, because that's a metaphor for our world. Do things really need to be in competition? Do all of our movements need to be all about fighting? Or can our movements and our energy and the things that we do, getting excited, in the alternative media be used for a greater good that brings us together? Like honey to attract bees instead of vinegar to repel. So, on the topic of going deeper into an awareness that we're in a spiritual matrix, the existence of miracles, angels, and guides can outweigh our fear of jinn, archons, demons, or other names that some people may be afraid to say. Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice. And just notice how we are inundated, even with the alien invasion predictive programming, to fear. It's like something out of V for, not V for Vendetta, but V the miniseries from the 1980s. And then, of course, there's the, I've barely been able to find the new one. I think it's online now. I haven't watched it. But there's a lot of predictive programming regarding the evil alien invaders, which could be viewed from a number of different ways. We also want to be suspicious, naturally, of those that romp the types, if you will. And I've had negative run-ins with some of her followers. People that want us to give faith to particular quote-unquote ascended masters. And there's disinformation in the New Age movement as well. We need to learn to trust ourselves and develop our own spiritual abilities. But it doesn't mean that we're not helped along the way, whether we ask for it or not. We may be destined to do certain things. So there may be people or forces out there, some call them aeons. In the world of Gnostics, you have the archons and you have the aeons, kind of like angels and devils. So we're not just humans being suppressed by archons. We're humans that are being aided behind the scene by mighty cosmic forces that operate on a different level other than the archons, that believe in interfering in our world indirectly, right? And altering our free will, where the other beings are set to play by a different set of rules. If they were to play by a different set of rules, they wouldn't be aeons or angels, there'd be demons or archons. Knowing that we're going through a major cycle, if you've learned anything about the changes in the magnetic field, the increased asteroid threats, increased activity or decreased activity from the sun, or changes in the sun's activity, and how that's, affecting crops, and likely will more so in the future as we go into the grand solar minimum. But then the war cycles that I talked about in 2024, 2025, when we hit that peak, these are cycles. And by understanding the cycles and what's come in the past, we can also step back from personalizing so much and being so afraid. Again, we're not here by accident. Everything happens for a reason. And we were born for a reason. Probably had our parents for a reason. Even if people want to go with other theories that the archons manipulated us in the reincarnation time wheel, fine. But that's because For a reason, we were not yet at a level of consciousness to break through the matrix. We are destined to be free from this type of a reality, right? And we have the opportunities and the technology now that our ancestors did not have. I'm coming to you, ladies and gentlemen, from off the grid. It's not easy to be isolated, but I have to increase my personal discipline and focus to get the job done and move the message forward, in particular this year, in what ways I can in a more positive direction than a negative direction. And criticize, and I can criticize other people all I want. It's not going to change things. What can I do to say what hasn't been said by others? And I would encourage people that are stuck being angry at other people in the alternative media to be the media. You don't have to. But I'm doing it, and I'm doing it without a pseudonym. I'm doing it with my real given birth name. Okay. That's fine if some people want to be anonymous. There's something about standing behind the name that you were given by your parents, whether you like your name or not, and being confident. If the government's going to do, the government has had all the time it wants to cause interference. Yeah, I've had attempted hacking. I've had missing emails. I've dealt with the paranoia. And then I've learned how to back that off, that paranoia, and not let in through the gates of psychosis that I'm being gang stalked. Spiritual attacks, that's something different. But spiritual attacks is something that we can learn to deal with. And so that's the key here. There's more information on psychic protection and spirituality than has ever been accessible before. I remember predicting a few years ago that on the internet, by this point in time, there would be more people talking about psychic protection, like on a large scale, because I remember Googling 3-4+ years ago on YouTube. Because I was curious, because we are talking about something that's not the ramblings of a schizophrenic in Portland or Dallas or New York, but something that's been talked about by our ancestors, whatever culture you identify with, or ancestry, whether it's Europe, we're talking about the Gnostics in that case, and the Cathars of the 12th, 13th century. If you're dealing with the Middle East, you're dealing with Sufis and people that have been killed off by Muslims, or even going before Islam to Zoroastrianism, before Islam came in and wiped that away, and they had an understanding of the sun. I have not studied Zoroastrianism yet. That's another book that I need to get some information on. I'm interested in what all the ancients left behind, but I stay away from just, the pop culture. Zechariah, I stay away from Sitchin stuff. There's a lot of questionable stuff that people have said that's there in interpretation, and I'm not interested in interpretation. Some people even call it the propaganda from the fallen ones themselves and how he'd interpret it. And I'm certainly not interested in worship. I'm interested in understanding what friggin' kind of planet I'm on. I sit here in Colorado and I feel a spiritual connection to Colorado because I look at, even though, right, I'm only in this period of 2018, right, and I've only lived so many earth lives and seen so many things on a deeper level going beyond my lifetime. I know that some major things, I can feel some major things happen here in Colorado. I don't fully know why I've returned and why I was in another county and why even, there was some hardships experienced there, like of all the timing. It could have been 10 years earlier, but there's a purpose behind everything. And we're being tested for higher levels. One time, and I'm not going to be calling particular people out, but I did mention before that I visited a particular person at his home, very well known in the on YouTube in regards to some of these topics, but very much kind of a dominator and kind of the back and forth rapport. Now I don't know whether he saw a video of mine that said understand that you're being tested or something to that effect about life being a test, but we were talking, and then all of a sudden he shifted into this really dark place and almost sounded like he was cursing God, like, what kind of God would be testing us? I didn't argue with him. I was kind of like just letting him, okay, what kind of God? Well, this guy's upset. Do you see a video of mine? Obviously, I hit a nerve. I wasn't trying to hit a nerve, but the idea of us being tested for a higher level was considered offensive to this person that is influential to so many. That's fine. But I don't think I'm playing victim or describing an evil creator. You know, if I'm interpreting a world where we're being tested, it's like a world where we're being refined. We have choices to make. Now we have information. And we've been living now in the day and age, oh, martial law is going to happen. They're going to cut off the internet. Like, even though we're heading towards certain realities, right? We've had all this time to use social media for the most mindful of purposes. We've had all the time to learn about mindful relationships and getting out of abusive relationships and just evolving beyond elements of the old world that are barbaric. There are also elements of the old world that are beautiful. We need to have wisdom to discern between the difference. The thing with regards to, if you experience racism, instead of responding with racism towards that perceived group or groups of people, we ask ourselves, how have we attracted that to ourselves? Stay with me here, because I don't see everything as about karma. There's a number of different reasons. We need to learn from it and be mindful in our responses. But what ways in our mind have we judged, even if it was just simply in thought form, or persecuted, if not in this lifetime or another? Now, if that's not the case and it's not karmic related, how could our sense of personal value be tested? In a world where we are spirit and soul, some people don't believe that, inhabiting human form, where we're facing those that are suffering from the illusions of separation, do we respond with anger, right? Or do we respond with the knowing that those things are coming as a result of our activation, as a result of the things that we're doing? There's a number of different ways people could be knocked down based on their personality, their perceived weaknesses, and things of that nature. And that's what I was getting at earlier. Martial arts isn't necessarily meant to, who's going to beat, in alternative media, and the amount of subscribers isn't about like who's king and who's under Alex Jones and who's on the alternative side. We need to think more abstract about everything. And some people, for them, I haven't lived, I have to haul water here. But it would be nice to get deep into like, a permaculture study, where we're going beyond, and that would include building. And I would like to live that way without the internet, although I'll probably do some videos in the future, whether it be here in Colorado. That's another thing that I'm putting out there, that, as things perceivably get worse, I'd like to meet more conscious people out there that understand the need for us to be able to work together. And I do believe that a mindful community can't exist without the need for government assistance, police services, and things of that nature. Not every community can do that. And it's not easy. But just because it's not easy doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. Sure, like I said in a previous video, we should be careful about some of those intentional communities. Then we also need to think about then what does it look like if there's a community of mutual respect, a local currency, and I, in this lifetime, don't know what that's like, and most of us don't, because we've been living in the system. But what if things collapse tomorrow? I've said for many years that I think a lot of relationships between men and women will come to some sort of balance or restoration. Oh, there's going to be chaos and people hurting each other, selling each other, unfortunately. I don't like to obsess on that, but the dark side of the future is where human trafficking can go, and it's not being discussed, but human trafficking is being discussed, but not from a perspective of the government deliberately creating a debt. That would include sitting presidents. That would include many sitting presidents. National monuments all around me and all around throughout America. That's leverage collateral on the national debt. So what happens when the government, by design, doesn't pay off its debts and then attacks those very nations that it's in debt to? What is the oldest profession? People usually say prostitution. I think it's human trafficking. I mean, maybe they just put prostitution under the human trafficking banner. But unfortunately, that is the evil of man and woman, because you literally have both genders involved in that trade and that business, especially when you deal with higher up levels as well, lower levels. It's considered, and I found this. There's a reason why I was meant to be born into Portland and to leave Portland. And I started calling it a microcosm for the macrocosm for a number of years. And that's because even though there's beauty there, and some could even say beautiful people and ideas, it's like a yin and a yang. There's also the underbelly, also the underworld, or the things that happen at night, or the things that happen when the bars close, and the after hours bars, underground bars and clubs open up. And then, we have like 100 years, 150 years, with Portland, 150 years, 180 years of history to read. Since they created that city and created the prostitution dens, and, the city ran the brothels, and the men that were the sailors, the loggers, and others that came to Portland to build the city, just like Ben built New York. And the strong men take a deal with that. Well, there's something in that drink. And they would wind up underground, shanghaied out to sea. That's the history. That's the history of the city in which I was born in 1980. They were shanghaiing people out of Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, right? And spoiled brats from New England that were sent away by their rich politician fathers, sent them to build the West Coast. And that extra money that came after gold, after the gold rush, not the Bitcoin rush, but after the gold rush, a lot of that extra money was sent up to Portland to establish these prostitution and trafficking networks. That's kind of grimy. And the thing is, we need to evolve beyond that. Whether you look at that from a soul perspective or a perspective of a city perspective, where someone wants to run for mayor or city council and clean it up. But I think, more than motivation is needed to clean it up, because you're dealing with a lot of people's energy. The reason I bring that up, if we want to change things, David Icke says we need to change the projection. We need to not scream at the wall in which the projector is beaming its light. We need to change what we're projecting. Okay, so we need energy, thoughts, consciousness. And then we look at our city layouts, the squares, the grid. Is this really the energy that we should be dependent on? Paying this much per month? And then I think about the people that are spending hundreds of dollars per winter, per month, using grid power. I'm using a Mr. Buddy heater. It's not perfect, but propane heating indoors is used in mobile homes throughout America. It's fairly standard. And so that's just one example. But for a lot of different things that we talk about, that I talk about, things have to get worse before they get better. Okay, if I never felt like I never had, for example, in 2012, a place in the city to continue doing what I'm doing, outside the box TV, I would have never gone off the grid. But I felt that yearning, and I felt that desire to heal from something and to feel a different part of the earth. And I knew that that was important in my own spiritual evolution. And that includes getting out of certain environments and realities that are unhealthy. So this is another important point. You live in a country, despite the negative things that we may say, that allows you the personal freedom to do what you want for the most part, at least now. Why look a gift horse in the mouth? So we were born in the United States, and we have the freedom to work where we want, to say what we want for the most part. And I see a lot of evidence that people could say pretty much whatever they want. And I never call for censorship per se, but I do call some things sick. And certain elements of violence and sexual violence and mass murder that are portrayed on the internet, there's a reason why that's allowed. And in the hands of children today. Okay? One of the reasons why I started a cable access show, I saw some things that some people could argue to be obscene. Although I wouldn't compare to the things I just mentioned. The guy's name was Jim Spag, the late Jim Spag. And he was an overweight guy who ran around naked with a wig. And he would go, yowza, bowza, wowza. And he would swing his little thingy around. And I'm like, this is on TV. Oh my God. Years later, after 9/11, when I also saw like a neo-Nazi program, you know, with the Death to Israel emblem with fire in the background and cackling. And I'm like, this is on TV? Yes, that's free speech. This is what free speech is. Oh, free speech. Oh. Oh. My life was never the same. I was going through my dark ages of trying to find myself, going through the urban blight, being affected by my environment in Portland's late 90s, only to see the light after 9/11 and find my own purpose. Oh, free speech. Met a guy named Mike Harrop, who had his cable access show in Portland. Had no interest, right, I guess, in the things that I'm interested in, but I saw what he did. He was doing, he was a mute, a mime, is it? You know, where they dress up like with makeup, white makeup around the eyes, and they're doing this whole thing. And he was doing these skits, and it was really, really deep. And it wasn't all comedy. Some of it was really, really serious, like dealing with drug addiction themes and recovery themes. And then he became a born-again Christian, and he stopped creating content. But he was an early inspiration to me because he was one guy with a high-8 camera. This is before the age of digital, when it was still tape. And I'm not old enough to be, you know, back in the day, to remember back in the day where people were cutting tape. But, you know, I did take radio broadcasting in school for 2 years, waste of money. But that was a period in which there were some classes regarding cutting audio tape and things of that nature. So I feel gifted and blessed that I was born at a time that by that early age of just coming of age, if you will, 19, 20, 21, even though 9/11 is an unfortunate event, it was timed, right? Because I think a lot of people going through that when they were just way too young to maybe even understand. And then some people have been brainwashed since and think we need a nonstop police state. Panopticon dystopia is a term that I used a decade ago, not lately. I think we've all become numb to the surveillance society, so I don't even bother talking about it anymore. Not that we should be afraid. But the point is, I feel like I was born at the right place at the right time, that went through certain things early in my life that set the stage for, as that was happening years after 9/11, for me to get involved in alternative media. And I find it ironic to this day that I didn't even know about YouTube, which is what I'm on now, and exclusively on, as well as my on-demand channel for those that want to support. And have access to additional content. Certain things I'll cover there that I won't be covering on the YouTube channel. But I still, for the most part, have most of the content on YouTube. The right place at the right time, and the right people around me. At that time, Clyde Lewis, who was somewhat of an inspiration, and a guy who has his own radio show in Portland, who told me that he would be my first guest, or he would be my guest if I launched my show. And I went through a major transformation those years of watching documentary films and reading books before the critical steps were made to go to cable access TV, take the classes, and at that point we had to buy tapes. It wasn't digital. These tapes were $35 each. They were called SVHS. Even though I'm young, I literally, my first intro, the one with the Knight Rider theme, for those that have seen it, was done with an analog editing system with the wheels, where you turn the wheels, find your marker, hit you're in, turn the other wheel, find your marker, hit out, hit start, and then boom. And I just, like, having experienced just a little bit of that, and it was kind of fun. It really brought out the creativity. You know, I never really got into filmmaking, but just imagine all the work people did back in the day before special effects. So we've come a long way. And that's the point. When I went into cable access, and it was setting up a table just like I am now, setting up the lights, blah, 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 it took a half hour to an hour. It required volunteers, although it was more of a produced show. And it was also live, where we took phone calls. But the point is, that helped me get my feet wet. And as far as I was concerned, despite the fears, and even people like Alex Jones back in the day were saying, all these people are on a terror watch list. It was very influential. All these Americans, you're going to have these people locked up and blah, blah, blah. And that can terrify someone into not taking any action at all. But for me, already having certain spiritual beliefs and views, things happening for a reason, already acknowledging previous to that intervention in my own life that prevented death, what you would call a miracle, multiple times. So all of that was deep within Alex Ansary before my first recording. The belief that this is really about the Spirit, what the Spirit is going through, and the idea that we can be testing a lot of things that I've been discussing before, but it was just wrapped up with a lot of pain of being really young and not really having a direction. It was when I found the direction that it was an alignment. It was actually kind of very close to the period of the Venus transit of 2004, June 5th, 2004, where one element of my life ended, something was lifted, another 6 months of disciplined growth, taking the classes at Portland Community Media, and then getting certified because you had to go through these steps to do my first show. And so in a way, I got that experience so I can be grateful for what we have before YouTube. And one thing I wish for other YouTubers is that they at least get the chance to learn what it's like to work with someone other than just themselves at some point. Because that is something I miss. Having people in the studio, having volunteers around, having people on the phone. And that's the other thing, you know? Certain people that were on my show early on, it seemed like a sign from the universe that I was on the right path. So even though there are certain things that we're talking about, right? And it helps people wake up to pull back their support from the military-industrial complex and to go on a more spiritual path. Isn't that a good thing? So I saw confirmation when a lot of guests, including certain guests that are no longer alive today, like Robert Bowman, who was the director of this space war program under Reagan, Peter Farley, some of you may not have heard of him, but he wrote some interesting articles online. I would find people. Sure, I would find people that may have been on other shows or coast to coast, but there were certain people that I found that were not on those shows. People like Leon Nagant. There's another person that did research into the Mayan calendar and wasn't talking about the end of the world in 2012, but the influence over the economy. And this was 2 years before 2008. He predicted some sort of an economic collapse of some kind in my show in 2006 based on his interpretation of signs in this Mayan calendar. Other people that I had on, you know, and so to me, it was a spiritual experience because before YouTube, it was connecting with a live audience that was in my community. And so, you know, even though, right, we can look back and kind of see some of those times as a little brighter. I've talked about this before, where there was more receptiveness to an anti-war message under George Bush, where I saw that just demolished under Obama and demolished under Trump. People don't like that voted for Obama when I say that. People don't like that voted for Trump when I say that. And I just try to remind them, like, they're on the same side as a Democrat, as a Republican, you know, in their misguided aggression, passive aggressive or otherwise, towards an actual independent. What we need are more independents that actually care about the people. What America needs, if we're going to talk about politics, are politicians that care about private property rights. They care about a homelessness solution. You know, got all these RVs all over America. We'll be covering more stories. I'll be covering more stories in 2018. Let me know what you would like to hear me cover or go back to. But obviously, there's a lot to talk about. And I think politicians need to be doing more for the American people with regards to where they're going to go if they end up homeless. Other than a camp, other than a government facility, other than just handing out more government, this, that, and the other. Yeah, in some cases, some people may need a little bit of government aid, but a lot of other people need to be how to be self-reliant. I think a lot of people, if they believed in themselves or if someone believed in them, like some of the homeless that I've seen in Portland or other cities that you're more familiar with, I've mentioned this before, if there was a website where they were able to, in a shop, make something, put it up on a website, have like a social media website for people getting back up on their feet. We have people throwing money literally at people all over the internet, in some cases, that are deliberately misleading their audiences and using their audiences. There's nothing wrong with being in a receivership, but it's what we do with it. It's what our intentions are, which was another point here, going beyond materialism. So if we find ourselves homeless or poor we may learn how to live with less. And it may take years for our value system to shift. For me, being a speaker before that 1 year in which I was living in a homemade teardrop camper, to living in the RV, to driving around, to establishing myself here at the moment, and then making goals for things I'll be doing in the future years. I see this year as being really critical in outreach to the world. But you can learn a lot from having less. You can also learn from living in abundance. Some people find themselves in abundance and they find themselves addicted to something, or a sexual addiction. They're looking for more. You know, that money can't actually get you high. But that money can do things that in even a non-drug way can take someone into oblivion. And so, you know, for the love of money, you know, the idea of having like a $7 drink, and I don't mean like an alcoholic drink. I'm talking like a $7 Coke in Europe. I'm talking to people that'll go out and they like spending $50 on a meal, and that's fine. That's a use of money. That's being generous. They're being generous when they tip that person $100 who, you know, only brought them their meal and came over a few times, a combined total of 3 minutes, and put on a good acting performance and played up the appetizers and calmly put down the wine. How much work is really involved in that? And by the way, I did bus tables for 5 years at Ruth Chris Steakhouse, so I've seen what that's like, you know. And certain people want to play the game or whatnot. They don't have to be very nice or educated. They might even hate. I've seen people curse their guests that made $300 to $500 or $1,000 in a night. I've seen these waiters talk garbage about their guests. One of the reasons restaurant work isn't for me has nothing to do with the customers. Customers have a right to be demanding if their food isn't. It's some of the interesting, odd, entitled individuals that are working for tips that are not grateful, that in some environments, in restaurant environments, they become like, I don't even know the right word to use, but the greed is gremlin-like. Okay, you're just gremlin-like. Don't feed the gremlins after dark. There's a reason why they have a cutoff hour, folks, at 2:30. So the point of all that is there's some people that are doing really well monetarily, but we could see them falling apart. There's some people right now that are bragging about being millionaires on YouTube, and they physically look like they're falling apart. It's because of what's happening to their soul. Okay, so a lot of us have been brainwashed to value money to a degree that we associate that with ourselves, and whether we have it or not, right? Sexually, right? We have to upgrade our sexuality. If a lot of people in this day and age, and I'm speaking as a male, are going to be looking at us based on the amount of money that we have, maybe it's time to go our own way and go on a more spiritual path and not be a slave to our lower senses and thus set ourselves free. It wasn't until, right, I actually started living that my earlier awareness of what was happening with the changes in relationships, and when I went off the grid and found myself, you know, without hearing from certain people ever again, I understood. And it's a certain perception. And that's okay, because I rather live my dreams and talk about the things that need to be talked about than be distracted by my lower senses, because I know where that goes, and it doesn't go to paradise. These are different things that I want to share with you, right? Because when I look at what's on my subscription feed on YouTube these days, there's very little that I'm watching. Okay, I have videos that I've downloaded, right, that I have gone out and searched with my own fingers. I have not looked for recommended or algorithm things, although that does help. But lots of different things regarding self-improvement with specifics to certain things, right? I will listen to those things over and over and over. And I'm becoming even more sensitive, you know, to things that are negative, and realizing when it's time to shut it out. You know, there's a time to hear Jordan Maxwell's view of the end of the world over and over and over and over, and how terrified he is until his last. And then, you know, you realize some of that stuff could really impact us. Can really impact us when we're hearing that from others. And that's why I'm seeking to be responsible when it comes to what I'm projecting. Because we are powerful projectors, and we do manifest our reality to a certain degree. The question is, are we doing that, right? The power of positivity for the greater good of all to raise consciousness, or are we doing that out of greed? And that's something that people should ask themselves. Until next time, I'm Alex Ansary reminding you, the path to the ultimate truth and place of power still lies within.